Every once in a while, I have this recurring nightmare. I show up to a college class and I forgot that there was a test that day. Now, I keep getting the feeling that I showed up late to the AI scene, so I'm glad to have someone who's been thinking about this at a high level for quite some time. Hey there, I'm your host, Ray Villalobos, a software engineer and senior staff instructor at LinkedIn Learning. And today we're talking to Andreas Welsh, Chief AI Strategist for the Intelligence Briefing. How are you doing, Andreas?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Super. So you've been in the software industry for 21 years, but you've been leading business development teams for AI and also did a AI Center for Excellence. So it looks like while I was sleeping on AI, you've been really working hard at it. Tell me a little bit about how you got interested and started with AI while some of us were missing out on the party.
Sure, happy to. So, look, like I said, I've been in the IT and tech industry since '01. And while I started very early, my career, I was about 16 when I started. I decided to go back to school a couple of years later while working full time and getting my bachelor's in computer science. It was about '08. And I heard about artificial intelligence, and it was actually an elective that I was supposed to take, but it was for 0 credits. So guess what? I didn't take it. Didn't have to. But part of the reason why I didn't take it also was that I thought, well, AI, that's too futuristic, too far into the future, not applicable for my role in IT, really not relevant. And boy, was I wrong, right? So it's been amazing seeing how over the last few years, this topic of AI has really taken up, and just these last few months as well. So at work, in my day job at SAP, one of the largest business application vendors in the world, I learned about AI and AI being a big priority for the company. And I got really interested in that space and working with customers specifically, being more customer facing, having been in IT for a good chunk of my career. So I had the opportunity to join the business development team and later on build and lead a COE, Center of Excellence for AI, to help our engineers and our customers understand where and how can we use AI, how should we think about that, what are good use cases, what are valuable use cases that we should embed, what makes them valuable, how do we measure the impact? And first of all, then also, how can we build a prototype and show the results and get buy-in to move forward? Maybe just quickly to wrap it up, I'm also a content creator here on LinkedIn. Had the opportunity to participate in LinkedIn's Creator Accelerator program last fall and got to connect with a lot of awesome and excellent creators as well. And so I'm really passionate about helping people in an AI leadership role or who want to aspire moving into an AI leadership role become more successful running projects together with their business stakeholders. So you see a lot of content from me on that topic. Please feel free to follow me and also stay tuned for my bi-weekly live stream called What's the Buzz, where I interview leaders and thought leaders specifically on that topic to make it tangible and have some good learnings out of that. So again,
That
thanks for the
is
opportunity to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited because, as I said, I get the feeling that I missed out on something. I think I was too busy just learning sort of the technical aspects of how things work. And sometimes you just, I think it probably surprised everyone how good this Chat GPT, all of the generative AI like DALI 2, all these tools are just becoming so pervasive now in the culture right this minute. It was really interesting to hear from Satya the other day about how he feels that the future is actually being crystallized right now. Like he feels that we're seeing what it's going to become. Like before, like maybe I don't know, before ChatGPT, people knew that there was this thing called machine learning, maybe AI, but they really didn't know where it was going. I think that we're getting at least maybe a glimpse of what's going to be happening, and that's super exciting. So usually I run this poll to see how people think about the topic that we're doing. So the poll for this week, and by the way, if you want to follow along with any links that I have on the show, there'll be in the show notes. And then anytime you see a little purple link like this one right here, you can go check something out at that URL if you want to. So I did this poll. The poll was, which of these departments you think will reap the most benefits from generative AI or ChatGPT in the next year? And I gave people the options: sales and marketing, operations, IT engineering, or HR and jobs. I'm always a little bit surprised at the results. I think that most of the people that watch my show are maybe a little more technical, have a computer science background. So I'm not surprised that IT engineering, topped the list. But I was surprised that sales and marketing did as well as it did because of the same reason. Most of the audience, I think, is pretty technical. So what do you think about these results, Andreas?
So I think there are tremendous opportunities in business overall, right? IT engineering, you probably have more the chatbot, help desk, maybe documentation type scenarios. Sales and marketing, I think if you look at the generative AI stacks that Madrona and other companies put out there to just show the different levels of the stack, you see all the SaaS vendors and applications at the top. That's where I feel a lot of those are actually centered around sales and marketing specifically, whether it's creating copy from a text prompt or from something similar that you want to have it expand on, or it's taking notes of your calls and summarizing those notes in those minutes, or even a video that can also use your voice to generate something. I think there are immediate opportunities there. And I think as we look into other areas of business, the thing that is common in business is it's about information and transporting information. And the way we do that is through language. So especially language and large language models, I think are a fantastic way there where we see a lot more opportunities to either create or distill or summarize and overall convey information in a much more succinct and different way than we're used to.
Yeah, I think like in a way, everybody's been playing around with AI, using like Siri and Alexa. I know before the meeting you had this great command for Alexa. I thought you were talking to me, but it's just like to turn up your whole setup. I mean, people have been been training on something that is like what we have now, but ChatGPT just kind of did something that it changed the culture into thinking, how could it be more like I think Satya calls it a co-pilot, and maybe other people call it an assistant of sorts that is just at another level because I get frustrated talking to Siri. It just doesn't seem to do what I need
Yeah.
it to do. Anyways, don't forget that we have a chat going on different platforms. So ask your questions there, and we're gonna pause at some point. It looks like everything's working well with the chat, so there's already people there saying hello and stuff like that. So let's see. Somebody's already following you, Andreas. That's great.
Awesome. Yeah.
So good to see people arriving into the chat and starting to participate. We're gonna go ahead and type in your questions, and we'll get to a point in the conversation where we'll ask any questions that you have for Andreas or for me if you want. So this is pretty cool. All right, so let's get into it. I'm gonna start off with this article that we saw this week. I mean, we saw so much activity like just in the last week that I feel like I was updating the show like constantly all the time. But I saw this article, I think, from Mark Zuckerberg saying that for him that this felt like the year of efficiency. Now, for how hot I mean AI has become, I wasn't expecting him to sort of have that statement. I mean, it's a tough economic time, but a lot of companies are laying people off and perhaps thinking about going leaner. Do you think it's still a good time to work on something like an AI strategy?
So I think it's it's a very unfortunate time for many of us in the industry, in a very unfortunate situation. I think especially the closer that this hits home and the closer the year of efficiency hits home, the more personal it becomes. So I have
Hmm.
a lot of friends and colleagues in the industry that have personally been affected and then have reached out, said, "Hey, can you help me? Do you know of anybody? Do you know any opportunities?"
Hmm.
So I think calling it the year of efficiency is pretty harsh because they're individuals and many colleagues and friends that I assume you and many of you in the audience have as well are being affected.
Absolutely.
Um, I think in addition to that and to those larger industry shifts, the best time to create an AI strategy was 5 years ago,
Mm.
and the next best one is now. So I wouldn't get distracted by tough economic times and these things here because at the end of the day, right, it's about helping people become more efficient, more effective, helping business get different insights. again, just talking about the AI strategy here,
Hmm.
and automating decisions, providing analysis, insights faster, personalizing information. So there are tremendous opportunities if you set your AI strategy right. But the key is that you must not do that in isolation. If you just treat it as a technology strategy or as an AI strategy, it's most likely going to fail. Because the question, and that's the important one, is how does that align with my business strategy first? And what are the objectives that I want to drive in and to achieve there first and foremost? And how can AI help me achieve them? And I think that applies to any industry. Whether it's predicting when's the best time to maintain my heavy machinery, or what products should I recommend, what bundles should I recommend to customers, so I can optimize my margin. But the key thing is really make it or define your AI strategy such that it's aligned with your business strategy and technology strategy, and so
Hmm.
that it becomes measurable. It's really not a sprint. It'll be a long-term investment in making those steps and realizing value from it as well.
I am still hoping that it's not too late for people like me that were kind of focused on programming. So I know that we have some stuff about that, and we actually already got a couple of good questions on that. What you recommend for somebody who maybe wasn't thinking 7 years ago. This maybe caught people by surprise. So we'll talk about those things in a minute. Now, the next thing is that a lot of people are getting sort of hyper focused on things like Chat GPT for writing assistance and image generation I guess it's the most visual things that people can see that they can do. You heard about Lensa and how much money they made creating an app that basically, uses stable diffusion to create different looking images based on your original photos. And we've seen really amazing things with technologies like Nerf. But those are the things that people are maybe focusing on. And I feel like maybe there are some opportunities in some of the areas that people aren't necessarily thinking about. So what are your thoughts there?
I think absolutely. Again, coming back to the earlier point, if you look at these architecture or architecture diagrams that have been floating around on social media as well, you get a good idea for where the opportunities are. Again, creating, summarizing, translating information, and creating new types of content, whether it's audio or video or just text. And I think all of that is great, and it's fine. It's a great source of inspiration for where you should be looking. And I see you're pulling up this chart here from McKinsey. I think they did a really good job putting together a first list of where opportunities are. And I'd recommend taking that as a starting point as well. So you see things, say in HR, having generative AI create interview questions for you. And there is some finesse needed to create these prompts to get some good results, and it's just the high level generic fluff. But these could be opportunities. Or you look at things like production errors and defect recognition, and also creating the training data to train your models. Right? If you think about generative AI for text to image, all of a sudden you have this huge machine at your disposal where you can create vast amounts of training data in different variations, everything just from a text prompt at the moment. So I think there are tremendous opportunities. Those are just two that come to mind, but I would definitely recommend taking a look at charts like this one to see where other opportunities are. Because at the end of the day, right, as fancy as having generative AI write jokes for you, or maybe a blog post might be, or even generating images, if you take that into a business context, your business stakeholders will ask you, well, how much is it going to cost me, and how much am I going to save? It's not about saving 2K or 5K on creating a piece of content. There's much bigger play here, and so it has to be measurable, whether it's generative AI or whether it's not generative AI, right? Other types of neural networks and AI. When you
Yeah,
talk to
there's so
business,
many, yeah, so many good tidbits in here, and I really like that you had references, I think, in one of your posts. So make sure you follow, follow really all the guests that appear here. But Andreas, specifically, if you're interested in strategy, he's got fantastic content. He posts very often, and it's all just really good snippets. You almost want to clip all of them. So yeah, but one of the things that comes up, and we've already gotten some questions about this, is this issue that generative AI, isn't 100% accurate all the time. And there are some concerns about, for example, ethical issues. Last week we talked to Ayodele Odubela, who is a machine learning specialist. And I asked her to sort of think of a question or a comment to ask you about. So I'm going to play her video, and then I'll get sort of your comments on that. So
The biggest issue is translating principles into action, into changes in the workflow, documentation, decisions that leadership needs to make, being able to identify their priorities, whether that's fairness, if that's security, finding the practical or the tangible technical solutions, whether that's leveraging the right Python packages for fairness. The question I would ask is, what is the context? And is this high risk? Is this going to have a large impact on humans' life? And then start to make a business strategy.
So I think I was talking about how asking her, if she was talking to a business leader, what sort of things do you want them to be thinking about and consider before they come up with the strategy? So what do you think about her thoughts there?
I think generative AI in the form that we're seeing it right now is still very early in its maturity. The
Hmm.
technology underneath, things like large language models, they've existed for quite some time, and I would consider them to be proven technologies. So we also know where the gaps are and where some of the issues are that we need to look for. Now it's really just becoming much more accessible. It's becoming accessible to the general public. It's not something that you'd see in a research lab or in innovation labs in large companies. You can actually try this out. And so I think the questions we're seeing now are indeed about ethics. They're also about intellectual property, as people are using these systems more and more, and as we are seeing more content created, more images created, right? We talk about privacy, especially in the context of Lensa, for example, or bias in data and data sets, over sexualization, specifically of images, or when you look at things like skin tones or other cultural in type of things. So I think we'll see a lot more discussion and debate there, especially. And then when you look at something like the lawsuit from Getty against Stability AI that was just filed recently, Stability AI being the maker of Stable Diffusion for image generation, right? They claim that Stability AI has used 12 million copyrighted images and metadata to train their model for image generation. And that brings these kind of questions really to the public, even to the courts, to decide also who owns the rights, what data can you actually use to train these models on, and then also who owns the rights to the output that is being created. Is it you as a user? Is it the company providing the model? What share do creators and other IP holders have whose data has gone into these models? So I think there are a lot of topics that we'll see a lot more debate on in the coming months and in the coming years. And I'm sure we'll also see things hitting the courts now.
All right, so I'm going to bring my dad into the conversation. My dad used to be a VP of operations at a really large bank. He's retired now. He knows nothing about generative AI. How do you deal, or maybe what kind of advice would you give to somebody who might be concerned about implementing something so new, maybe so foreign, and they might not see some of the benefits, strategizing about some of the new approaches?
I think that's a really great question, because we'll run into that. You will run into that in your companies every day. Right? Not everybody is as involved with technology. Not everybody is as excited about technology, and not everybody is excited about change as much as we are, especially when we're able to drive it. So I think the main path to success here is really to bring people along on your journey. Make sure that you involve your business stakeholders in your AI projects, and that you are transparent and that you're truthful about why you are pursuing certain projects or want to pursue certain ideas. I think it really shows, and it helps them in their role. And if you're able to make that connection of why do we want to do this and how does it really help you and genuinely help you, and you ask for feedback and you ask for input, that's when I have seen in my line of work that there are strong support, or that there's strong support being formed. So really not just involve them in the beginning, but also involve them throughout the project and the development.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps to have the, I don't know, the culture recognition finally, Perhaps the folks who haven't been in the technology field are recognizing, and they've had some experience with like Siri, but maybe they think it doesn't work that well, like me on occasion. But they have had some experience with some of these assistants, and maybe they have heard some of the news about the massive sort of changes. They've seen like the stock prices of things get affected by some of these news, which brings me to another point this week. And as I mentioned, I was sort of updating what I wanted to talk about this week as things were developing. We had two really huge development. Number one was Google launched their product they're calling Bard. They talk about how they have been working, in AI for quite some time, and that they are basically Bard is a Chat GPT competitor. And then the day after, almost immediately, Microsoft announced this new AI-powered Bing and Edge. And they keep on using this word Copilot. So I'm really interested in that because I know that they released a product called Copilot for GitHub. So what can people learn from where these big companies are going that maybe they can implement into their own sort of thoughts about AI strategically?
Sure. So, look, I think this week has really shown us so many news and so many great examples, and also that generative AI is obviously really, really hot in the tech industry right now, specifically software, right? And I think towards the end of last year, we were seeing actually quite the opposite about AI in general. So I was seeing a lot of media coverage and expert opinions that we might be headed into the next AI winter. And people were talking that up, that funding is likely going to dry up, interest is going to decrease in that topic of AI overall, because since the last hype, 2016, 17, 18, the conclusion was AI hasn't really delivered on that promise, and we haven't really seen all the value that was supposed to be created. And I think then, along comes OpenAI, Chat GPT, now Microsoft. Obviously, we had heard about Google and Lambda already in the summer, and whether AI can develop sentience. But it's really taken the tech world by storm. And I thought we had left those debates about, is this going to replace my job? 2-3 years ago, and we had moved on to issues and questions of ethics and how can we build these things in a way that they're ethically compliant and that they really serve us well. And now we're back to that part, especially in the creative spaces. Is this going to replace copywriters? Is this going to replace designers, and so on? So to me, that part is really fascinating and interesting, and I think it's becoming even more important. So personally, I'm really excited to try out the products by both vendors and see what they look like and feel like. And I've already signed up to the waitlist for Microsoft's products, and looking forward to taking a test drive of what Google is putting out shortly as well. And I'm assuming many of you are too. So I think while it seems that there's a lot of buzz around these topics, I also think there's going to be a lot of value. And like we talked about earlier, looking at some of these scenarios, where can you use already what's available today to help you in your workflows? Maybe if you're in HR or supporting someone in HR, having a large language model or generative AI create interview questions for you, perfect, right? That's great value add. Or if you're starting or if you're staring on a blank piece of paper and you want to write something, ask it for some suggestions and say, give me 5 examples of this or that. And you take the best of them, or you combine them, or ask it for a few more iterations. I think just because it's so accessible right now, there are a lot more opportunities that we can capitalize on. And frameworks like the one from McKinsey or others that you might see are good ways to get started.
Yeah, I really feel like something has actually, I don't know, you can see the change happening in how people view these technologies. And you alluded to that very well. Now, I love this post that you did on what to do when your strategy goes south. So if somebody's getting started today, what would you say they do to sort of avoid some of those issues altogether?
I think the easiest way, right, when it goes south, is to blame it on your business peers and to say, well, they weren't ready, they didn't get it, they have no idea what AI is, and that's the reason why we didn't succeed, or we weren't as successful as we thought we could be. But I think realistically, there's also some introspective needed here, and I would actually recommend thinking about that before you get started with your AI strategy. So to me, the AI strategy is not just about what do we want to achieve or how do we make it measurable or whose technology are we going to use in that stack, but you really, again, to that point earlier, need to bring people along. So I think there's 3 really good ways that that leaders and aspiring leaders can take here. One is mandatory training. So select colleagues in your department, in your team, talk to them who's got an affinity for technology and maybe wants to learn more about what is AI and what does it actually do. It's really good as a scalable baseline to roll out some basic information to the group of people that you want to reach. What is AI? How does it work? What can you do with it? What are the ethical implications you need to be aware of? So what are things you should be doing, shouldn't be doing, and so on. But the challenge will be that without a concrete use case or scenario that you want to work on together with them, the knowledge retention will be rather low. Right? How many trainings have we taken without being able to apply it immediately or shortly after? And how much of that have we really retained in terms of knowledge? The other one, the next step up, I think, would be as you're thinking about setting up AI projects, you have a good opportunity almost in a greenhouse setting, if you will, bring in people from the business, domain experts that understand that part of the business really, really well, work with them on understanding what is the business problem we have and we want to solve. How can we make that measurable? And through that, almost have a one-on-one coaching with them, if you will. But make sure that they become multipliers as they go back into their organizations, that they can now share what is AI, how you use it, what's in it for us, and become a multiplier for you. Certainly, the scale is a bit more limited because of that one-on-one, but you can make sure, and you can be sure that you'll have very deep connections and you'll have a lot of supporters that way as you're building it. And also your teams, your technical teams will learn a lot about the domain that you're working in, whether it's finance or HR, manufacturing, whatever other part of the business. And then lastly, as you're building these multipliers, you want to think about forming a multiplier community. So you have different stakeholders from different business areas that come together, that learn together, that discuss projects, share what has worked really well for us, what should you be looking at, maybe what has not worked so well for us, or what others should avoid repeating. And it might not be that easy to facilitate it virtually, but if you get this community going, not just started, but going, you have a great opportunity, again, of having multipliers that will amplify your message in their areas. And that might then also come back to you and say, hey, I think we have an idea here that we want to solve with AI because I know what AI can help us with. I understand the business problem, and I just need some help on the technology side. So it's all about enabling the organization and turning your peers also into AI ambassadors for you, if you will.
Those are some fantastic points, and some people were already asking about this. So Thomas was asking, how do you start if the enterprise has no clue on AI, which is a great question. How do you, this is, I guess, similar. How do you leverage an AI for a startup? And then, when you're getting started, I mean, this is a fantastic post. And also that this is the quality of the posts you get when you follow Andreas. He also has a newsletter, so make sure you connect with that. But I mean, sometimes, you just, hear posts about this and that. This is just like condensed, like skillful knowledge based on experience that I really love, because you just nail it in 3 points right there. So super, super well done. So,
Thank you so
we're
much.
we're talking about, you have some experience working with huge companies. Give me some good advice for somebody who's like an individual, or in this case, somebody who mentioned that they're maybe thinking of it from the point of view of a startup. What do you tell individuals who are thinking what their role perhaps is in something like this?
Sure. So I think, first of all, a few things that are universal, whether you work for a large company, you are building your startup, working in a startup, or you're an individual. And I think that is really, before you define your AI strategy, figure out what is your business strategy first. So be very clear on that. What are the objectives you want to drive and achieve as a business overall? then as you look into more of the KPIs, the key performance indicators, how do you track and measure if your business is on track or even exceeding the goals? And then look at how can AI be used to help influence these KPIs. I think it's a lot of times about reducing risk and cost or increasing revenue. Those are the two main things that business care about. So when you look at an individual level, and it's funny enough that you ask, I was going through that just a couple of weeks ago, and I was making a decision on whether I want to sign up for a year-long subscription for a video editing tool that I can also use for podcasts and all these kind of things. And a lot of these tools have more and more AI embedded nowadays. So the decision was then really, what is the return on investment that I expect to get if I make this investment? And so whether you have a conversation with a CFO of a Fortune 100, 500,000 company or a startup, or with the CFO of me, the question is, how much am I going to spend, and how much is this going to make me? I think that's the basic here. Now, where I think that startups have a tremendous advantage compared to more established companies and incumbents is that they're really able to build in a cloud-native way, data-centric way, AI-centric way, and also build their business model around it. You see a lot of the large and huge companies, sure, they will look at AI and use that at a different scale because they have access to much more data. But as a startup, you're much more nimble, and you're building on a blank sheet of paper. And I think that's a great opportunity these days. One of the examples that I really like. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you think about it, this is where OpenAI came from, right? The company that Microsoft invested first 1 billion on and then 10 billion is a startup, and they did very well quickly because of exactly the points that you've brought up. So
yeah. If you look at the streaming industry, Pandora had this business model where they showed you or played songs to you that were similar to something you were looking for, recommendations. Spotify doing the same, Amazon Music now doing much of the same with their free model. But Spotify then at the end of the year gives you your personal summary and what type of songs and tastes and so on you have. So I think there's a lot of AI there, and if you're a startup, you have a lot better opportunities to build that into your stack from the very beginning.
Yeah, and we saw OpenAI, grow so quickly. I think they reached something like 1 million users in 5 days, I think it was, and 100 million within the first couple of months. Those are numbers that big companies haven't been able to watch. To see, a startup basically get to those numbers so quickly means that there are just an amazing amount of opportunities in the field. So I've got a question from Julian, and this relates to the next thing that I wanted to ask you. So now there's a lot of sort of things happening about regulation frameworks, and a lot of governments getting involved and regulating this industry. I know that when the web first appeared, it was sort of left alone for a while to allow itself to develop. What are your thoughts here? Is there regulation that's going to make sense? How do we make sure it doesn't stifle innovation too much?
Look, I was born in Germany. I've been living in the US for a little over 12 years. So I have a very strong sense of privacy and data protection. It's one of the core values, not just in Germany, but in the European Union overall, if you look at things like the general data protection and regulation. Since having come to the US, it's awesome because I get to see and experience how companies are able to innovate very quickly and iterate very quickly. I think it needs to be a balance that we need to find and that we need to strike. So on one hand, I see and I hear with the EU AI Act that it's very well intended and that it does seek to protect the privacy of individuals and the types of decisions that AI can and should be used for. On the other hand, just the other week, the NIST released their AI risk management framework here in the US, which I think outlines a lot of great and important aspects of how you should be building AI products, how you should think about it also from the risk management angle. But it's really voluntary whether you do adopt it and to what extent you do adopt it. So between strong regulation and the the challenge of enforcing that and monitoring that in guidelines that are voluntary to be implemented, I think we need to find a balance, and actually a better balance there, because with AI, we are able to automate decisions much more quickly, and decisions that can have a significant impact on our lives, on the lives of others. So I think we need to continue working on that, and need to do even better than what we have today. I think they're excellent examples, but a bit more iteration is needed there, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we need to get that, I think, most of all, right. Like, we need to get not just the models to do better, but whatever regulation happens, I think it needs to be the right type of regulation, having, you know, a great amount of thought being given to how that's implemented to make sure that we give this thing the chance that it needs to develop, and then also that it's being developed responsibly at the same time. So definitely need it, and so good that people are working on that. So next week I have an exciting guest. His name is Logan Kilpatrick, and he's the head of developer relations for OpenAI. He's coming into the show. He's starting out a new team that wants to reach out to developers. So he isn't necessarily like running the OpenAI organization, but he's basically starting a new team. So I was wondering if you would have a question that you would want to ask him as he comes in next week into the show. Like what question would you like to ask him about, perhaps a strategy or what they're doing?
For me?
Yes, for you. What would you ask Logan?
Oh boy!
Yeah.
So that's a surprise moment. I think a key question that we're all asking is, when is it going to be available to the public, and where can we learn more about it, and how can we finally incorporate it into our own products?
Yeah, I think that another thing that I'm curious about with Logan is what he's working with is basically making the API better known in the industry. What people maybe don't realize is that Chat GPT is basically just a product, and Sam Altman, the CEO, said about it that he thought that it was an obvious product for somebody to build, but that it was not getting built at all. And he was like, well, if nobody's going to do it, we're going to go for it. And all of a sudden it becomes like the most popular thing in the history of technology. So I'm really curious about, what some of the other opportunities might be for that product. I mean, is there anything they're leaving on the table? I don't need it to be the hugest product ever, but there's got to be like a lot of other obvious ideas, like low hanging fruit. So I'm really looking forward to have him come back on the show. So let's talk a little bit about the things that you're working on right now. I mentioned a couple of them already. So what sort of things do you want people to know about you?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity, first of all. So, like I said, if you're looking for information on how you can run your AI project successfully in business, please do follow me. There's daily content on the subject. It's not only me and my expertise, but I run a bi-weekly live stream called What's the Buzz, where I invite leaders and hands-on experts to share how they have turned the AI hype into concrete outcomes. And just last week, we had over 1,000 participants, or over 1,400 views on that stream alone, about what the big trends in AI and in automation will be this year. Later on in the month, I'm super excited. I'll have Mary Perk, the managing director of Wharton Business School's AI and Analytics program on. Wow. In mid-March. Actually, Tom Davenport, one of the leaders in that AI space, will join me as well to talk about what it means to go all in on generative AI. So I'm really excited. Hope you'll follow and you'll join some of those sessions as well. And really, feel free to ask any question that you have. I think we're all here to learn. It's a great opportunity, and it's a great platform to exchange ideas, to learn from others, and just to up-level and upskill ourselves as well.
I am already surprised, my friend. So let's go to some questions. We do have an amazing. I try to ask actually some questions because we have so many of them. So I'm gonna pick some of the ones from the chat, and we'll bring them up. Let's see. This is a question from, I don't know if I'm doing this name right, Vihanath Rao. What are some of the ways that one can balance traditional ML with large data and exploring this new AI with the same? Interesting combination. What are your thoughts there?
So I think, if you look at or first of all, look at the data that you have, right? How are you able to use it? How are you maybe using that already today? And then think about where things like large language models can add additional value. Again, a lot of the data that exists in business and business work with is textual data or tabular data. So how can you make better sense and create better meaning for somebody in front of their screen, whether it's in front of a monitor or in front of a phone, and just give them better information, better insights. So how can you work with the data that you have to provide better insights to the person using it and needing it?
So David also says that as it is now, the Chat GPT and other generative tools lack reliability, accuracy, as the user as needs become more technical or more sophisticated. I think his question is, how safe are we to use something that is technically maybe on a beta, or maybe, there's definite issues like, I know that I've asked, Chat GPT, like, who am I? And it starts saying some things that aren't accurate. So how does a business sort of balance like that issue that some of these things aren't 100% where they should be?
I think what's key at the most basic level is understanding that this is a large language model. It's a piece of technology that was built, again, in simple terms, to predict the next word in a sentence, to predict the next word that makes the most sense, this most logical word to choose in that sentence. It's not about being factually accurate. I think these are things that we're seeing now as we're experimenting with this in a sandbox or a playground or a research preview, but combining that with other techniques where we are able to maybe first of all pull search results and then do AI on top and use generative AI as a way to output the information in a much more user-friendly way could be one option, at least in the interim. But I think most of all, also making your peers and stakeholders aware that this is not going to be accurate 100% of the time. So you need to do your research. You need to double check and fact check. If you put in a piece of text and you wanted to rephrase it or create other variations of it, I think we're seeing this as relatively safe, right? But still, you would want to have a human in the loop and check the output that is being created before you use it in a next step or publish it.
That's a good point. And I think that I think everybody should be in at the very least, like a research and development sort of phase where you're experimenting and you are trying to figure out how you can use these sort of technologies internally and then for business needs. So this is a good question from Maud. How would AI influence the future of engineering companies? We've seen a lot of that recently. What are your thoughts here?
I think that really depends on the area that you're looking for, right? It could be simple things like writing documentation or summarizing legal text in a much more friendly and user-friendly way, even especially if you're not a lawyer, right? Or specifications, whether it's writing them and it has to be very accurate, right? To be able to trust it, but translating it back could be an option. So think about, say, a piece of machinery. Think about a pump maybe that you want to order, and you don't know exactly all the specifics, but it needs to do X, right? It needs to have a certain throughput of fluids per minute, and that's one of the big criteria you have. So instead of going through a product catalog and looking for these kind of things, you could use generative AI to translate that into something you can look up in the product catalog and then show it to you. Same applies to fashion or in any kind of scenarios where you want to translate something into something else without knowing all the details. Yeah.
Interesting. So here's one that I wasn't thinking about at all, but it's, I think, a really good question. He says he read an article. Francisco says he read an article about the carbon footprint of Chat GPT. Are there any opportunities to improve something like that of AI? Interesting. What are your thoughts here?
I think that's an excellent question. So with all the focus on ESG and sustainability, we have seen also last year, especially, calls of how can we make AI more sustainable and less resource intensive.
Mm.
I think that is something we will see develop over time. To be honest, I haven't seen anything lately specific to the large language models and the energy that's being consumed, but it has to be something that the industry keeps thinking about and keeps at the forefront as well.
Yeah, you also talked about this a little bit, which I think is an interesting question. What impact do you think it'll have on the job market? This is really the big question that everybody seems to bring up, and I think you touched on this before. So thinking about, the fact that I think Sam Altman said that in 5 years you may not even need these prompt engineers, and I think you made a post about
Yeah.
the new job might be prompt engineering. So where do you think that the technology is going to have maybe starting direct impact, and how do you think that's going to change like in the future?
Sure. So while it's not my quote directly, we've seen that on floating around social media as well, right? You're not going to, or your job is not going to be replaced by AI, but your job is going to be replaced by a person using AI.
Mm-hmm.
Was the saying. So my perspective on that is to prepare in the way that we learn how can we use this kind of AI to our advantage. Right? How can I
Mm-hmm.
use this to plan my meetings better, organize how I write emails and structure information better? How can I use it to iterate on ideas more quickly? How can I maybe use it to write a blog post or copy for the web if I'm in the industry? And those are really just the beginning, really just the surface that we're scratching. But I think it's really a lot about how can I and how can we use AI to become more efficient and effective. And if we figure that out individually, and if we get to play around with things like that, and do have the curiosity, I think we're very well prepared for what's ahead.
I think there's a sense in which everybody is going to be a lot more productive in the future. So you're going to be perhaps expected to be more productive in whatever your role is. So if your role is perhaps, social media, creating tweets for an organization, now that you have a tool that can generate just a variety of ideas really quickly, perhaps pre-write some of those tweets, and you've got these advanced tools that will perhaps automatically reply. Or I think that we're going to see kind of a change in maybe the productivity of people, and the also at the same time the expectations that companies are going to have about what you're able to do. Because in a company where perhaps something like video editing has been something that becomes like a huge cost for people, when you have tools that can aid you in those things and make that process basically commoditized, then you end up with just the company's expecting like a higher level of productivity. And I think that's what we're probably going to be seeing, over time become the impact. If you're competing with somebody that can do 10 times the work because they're being assisted by AI, then that maybe will become the standard for everything. So another
One
good,
more
oh,
point.
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah.
one more point on that. I think the other interesting question would be: do we value human-made things or work products more at some point? Because AI commoditizes it so much, you can get it anywhere, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not as differentiating. But will we assign a different value to something that has been created by a human?
Hmm.
Then
Interesting. And I think that perhaps in an age where you can't maybe necessarily tell, like I think still to a certain degree, you can tell when a computer wrote something, or like when you chat with ChatGPT, you can't use exactly what it says. You have to go verify the data, in what it's giving you, and then you have to, modify it because, a lot of times it'll write something, but it won't be my voice. So if I want to use, say, if tell it to write a tweet for me, that's not how I write. It's how it writes. So that personalization is not yet there, but in a few years, it is perhaps going to be much better at mimicking. Like I know there's tools now where you can check essays to see if they've been written by maybe Chat GPT, but then somebody's going to write another thing that crushes that checker and makes it even harder to tell. So we're going towards a future where I think perhaps the mechanics of doing the thing, like the mechanics of maybe music production, the mechanics of editing video, the mechanics of like audio production, those things are going to be democratized. But the important thing is that the one thing you learn about ChatGPT is it does not know when it's done a poor job. That is a thing that I think humans are going to perhaps really want, stuff that is handmade and perhaps, generated by an actual person, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think both of us have a little bit of insight into this next question from Vladimira. So what do you think of a future of design education and the role of designers in an AI world? Because we both do kind of like content production, and I've seen your show, very well designed. I'm jealous I got to train my Siri to do your Alexa trick with the lighting and everything. So what do you think are some of the thoughts on maybe a future where AI is used in design and education?
So I've worked with a few design agencies in the past, and one of the parts or tasks of the project have been, can you pull some stock images? They should have a certain mood, maybe a certain lighting, should be a certain theme. And we had gone back different iterations multiple times, and until we all agreed, yeah, this makes sense. So I think for something like this, where it is time intensive, it's first of all time intensive to convey what am I looking for, and then for somebody on the other side, on the agency side, to look for this information, come back, you have a meeting, and you say, well, yeah, not quite. We need to tweak this a bit more. At a minimum, right? If you're a designer in that creative space, generative AI should give you a lot better options, especially over time as things mature even more, to pull a lot more variations, or maybe do that on a 10-15 minute call and say, okay, let's say I want a bright mood, I want people in there, I want diversity, I want an office setting, and all of a sudden, much like you get it in Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or DALL-E, now you get these options. Okay, well, let's maybe continue with this one. So I think the work in itself will not go away. It will just change. And again, going back to that part of how do we use AI and how do we use it to our advantage will become a huge factor, in my opinion.
So I want to add that I think it's akin to, if you watch an old movie and you see like an overhead shot of like maybe they're flying over water into a city, that used to be an extremely expensive shot to try to get. Nowadays, with drones, that shot is like $250 on a good day. Or what if you now forget even the 250? Then you can just go into like an AI and tell it you want a shot like that. And to tell it, sometimes maybe you take a picture of a shot, but the day isn't right, so you could just say, "Oh, fix this shot." Like I think those constraints of, the great thing is going to be that as an educator or as a technology or a designer, you're going to have a concept. Right now, I think the struggle is getting the sort of feeling and the concept that you have in your mind that it's going to be successful to match what's in your mind. I think that is going to go away. You're going to be able to get exactly what you think and without having to spend a ton of money. And so again, everything I think will be democratized, and you'll be able to have the same budget. Like if you remember, I was rewatching The Matrix the other day, and I remember that bullet time shot. That with nerfs would be something like almost, nothing, right? With the technology that you take a few photos of an environment and it can navigate in 3 dimensions over that environment. I mean, the stuff that's opening that it's opening up for people is really amazing, and I think that you are seeing some of those things in video production. Like, look at this show. This is something that we wouldn't have been able to do without a huge crew. But you look at it, I can talk to somebody across the world and have a fantastically produced show with music, graphics, animations, and all that stuff. So it's an exciting time, I think, to be a designer, as well as somebody who is training other people as well, because all those constraints that we've been put on are going to go away. So I'm going to close with one last comment from Hallie, because I think it's really funny. She says, in our organization, I think we would have to implement it on the sly. Then when it's integrated in our processes, they would have to accept it. That's sometimes how great technologies happen. I think that if you look at the development of some of the spy planes, they were all done by a Skunkworks team doing something kind of away from everybody else so that they could be, I don't know, you could prove that it was going to work. And a lot of the things that we do end up being those kind of like small projects that you begin. And then this entire show is actually something like that, something that I just started doing. And now I have the experience to do a much better product because all these tools have become something that is more accessible to just a normal person like me. So let's see. For closing, I will just say we have this page that you can go to if you want to keep up with future episodes, or if you want to go rewatch this episode, just go to this URL right here and you can look at all the posts that we're doing, all the polls, take a look at any episode before sign up for the future episode with Logan Kilpatrick. As I mentioned, next time, Logan Kilpatrick, the head of developer relations from OpenAI, is coming to the show. He's starting this new team that wants to reach out to developers to use OpenAI. And as I mentioned, Chat GPT, the fastest growing product in the history of technology, was something that they did with the API, and look at what it's done for them. So I just want to thank you so much, Andreas, for coming into the show. I'm so happy. I can't really believe how the universe works, that the week that I would have wanted to have somebody talk about strategy, we planned this out for a long time and things just worked out so perfectly. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And thank everybody for watching. We'll catch you again next time.